Judge Edward Chen walked into court ready to humiliate Pam Bondi. But just minutes later, the gavel dropped on him. What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom. The federal courthouse in downtown Miami felt unusually tense that morning. Journalists filled the gallery shoulder to shoulder, their laptops perched awkwardly on their knees, pens and phones at the ready. What had drawn the crowd was not only the high-profile case on the docket, but the collision of two reputations known across legal and political circles. Pam Bondi, Florida's former attorney general, was representing the defense. Her courtroom presence had always been sharp, calculated, and unflinching. Today, her navy suit was crisp, her posture precise, and her silence deliberate. She reviewed her notes quietly at the defense table, glancing once at her co-counsel without a word. Judge Edward Chen entered at exactly 9 o'clock. The bailiff called for all to rise. Chen didn't acknowledge the room beyond a slight nod. His black robe billowed slightly as he climbed the steps to the bench. His face, set in a permanent frown, scanned the courtroom with faint disdain before landing on Bondi. "Ms. Bondi," he said without waiting for introductions, "I see you're taking on the defense today. That surprises me." The comment was loud enough to carry through the room. It wasn't casual. It was an invitation to humiliation. The gallery shifted. Reporters looked up. "Yes, Your Honor," Bondi replied, evenly. "I'm lead counsel for the defense." Chen adjusted his glasses, looking down at the file in front of him. "Well, let's hope your preparation exceeds your last appearance in my courtroom. We wouldn't want another display." The insult hung in the air. There were no objections. There didn't need to be. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. Pam Bondi said nothing. She simply flipped the page in her notebook, her pen ready. Opening arguments began. The prosecution spoke first. Judge Chen allowed them latitude, even when their statements wandered from evidentiary foundation. He nodded occasionally. He asked clarifying questions, none of them hostile. When Bondi rose to respond, the atmosphere shifted. Every sentence she began was interrupted. Every citation was challenged. Every objection was overruled before she finished stating it. Her voice did not rise. Her face did not change. But her pen moved, slowly and deliberately. On her legal pad, she drew a vertical line. Next to it, short entries in clean handwriting. Objection denied, no basis given. Prosecution speculates, aloud. Defense motion blocked, no review. She wasn't defending herself. She was documenting something bigger. By mid-morning, even the reporters had begun to take notice. Some typed faster. Others glanced across the gallery, silently comparing notes. A juror near the end of the box shifted in his seat, watching the judge more than the lawyers. At 11:04, during a brief recess called for procedural review, a woman entered the back of the courtroom. She wore a gray blazer and carried no purse, only a slim black folio. Around her neck hung a Department of Justice badge. Judge Chen didn't seem to notice. His focus remained on Bondi. When court resumed, he spoke before she was fully standing. "Ms. Bondi, let's try to keep your arguments concise today. I trust we won't need a refresher on basic evidentiary law." Her tone did not change. "Understood, Your Honor. I'll proceed to our first item." But the damage was being logged. Not just in Bondi's notes. In the room. By 11:27, Judge Chen had sustained 4 of the prosecution's objections without asking for clarification. He had overruled all 3 of Bondi's. His pattern was no longer subtle. Bondi finished her statement. Her final point was cut short, yet again, by a dismissive wave of Chen's hand. "We'll break for lunch," he said. "Ms. Bondi, I suggest you use the time to consider whether your client might be better served with a plea arrangement." The smirk on the prosecution's face did not go unnoticed. Pam Bondi didn't answer. She gathered her notes with slow, careful motions. No reaction, no rebuttal, only a glance toward her co-counsel, who nodded and slid a new folder onto their table. It was thicker than the others, and on its cover was the federal seal. As Judge Chen stepped away from the bench, he walked past them without a glance. He had no idea what had just been placed on the record, and he had no idea what was coming next. Court resumed at 1:30 sharp. The air in the room felt heavier. The gallery had filled even further. Word had spread over the lunch break. Something unusual was happening in Courtroom 4B. Judge Chen entered with the same posture as before, but there was something more performative now. His voice was louder, his tone more theatrical. He looked toward Bondi with that same half-smile he had worn all morning. "Ms. Bondi," he said, "before we continue, I had a chance to review your earlier filings. I must say, I'm struggling to follow your legal reasoning. Perhaps you can enlighten us with your unique interpretation of precedent." There were a few soft laughs from the gallery. Someone from the prosecution whispered to a colleague. Pam Bondi stood calmly. "I'd be happy to elaborate, Your Honor. The precedent established in Harrison versus Miller." Chen interrupted. "Really, Ms. Bondi? That case was effectively dismantled by the 11th Circuit just last year. I'd have expected a former state attorney general to keep up with current jurisprudence." The correction was not just rude. It was wrong. The case Chen referred to was a different one entirely. Harris versus Millbrook. The mistake was obvious to any serious legal professional. But Chen didn't correct himself. He continued, "Perhaps in Florida, the standards for argument are more flexible. But in this courtroom, we require more than charm and a resume." Bondi did not respond to the insult. She turned a page in her binder and placed a tab document on the evidence cart. "Your Honor, I'd like to refer the court to page 17 of our supplemental filing, which distinguishes the two cases. And for the record, the 11th Circuit upheld the core findings in Harrison versus Miller. The case Your Honor cited was Harris versus Millbrook." Chen did not look down. "Note your objection," he said. "It won't affect the outcome." The temperature in the room seemed to change. A few jurors looked at one another. A court reporter paused briefly before resuming her typing. In the back, the Department of Justice observer closed her folio and began typing on her phone. Pam Bondi remained composed, but her tone had shifted. It was firmer now, and when she turned to the judge again, her voice carried more deliberately. "Your Honor," she said, "before we proceed further, I respectfully request the court acknowledge the irregularities in today's proceedings. I am entering into the record a summary of procedural discrepancies observed during the morning session." She slid a document to the clerk. Judge Chen's face stiffened. "Ms. Bondi," he said, "this courtroom does not exist to accommodate grievances. It exists to uphold the law." "I agree, Your Honor," she replied, "which is why the behavior we're documenting must be preserved in the record." "You may note whatever you wish," Chen said, brushing his fingers across the bench. "It won't change the weakness of your case." The gallery was no longer laughing. Bondi turned to her co-counsel. A binder was exchanged, not rushed, but carefully. From that binder, she withdrew a copy of the Judicial Code of Conduct. She opened it, placed it on the podium, and read, "Canon 2. A judge shall avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities." Canon 3. A judge shall perform the duties of judicial office impartially and diligently. Judge Chen narrowed his eyes. "Are you accusing this court of violating judicial conduct, Ms. Bondi?" "I am entering into the record specific actions and statements from today's session that may constitute violations. The final assessment is not mine to make." That was the moment the courtroom changed. Not in volume, but in gravity. The difference between a lawyer enduring pressure and a lawyer making a record. In the next 20 minutes, Bondi outlined each interruption, each denied motion, and each procedural irregularity. She referenced timestamps. She provided transcript line numbers. She never raised her voice. Judge Chen tried to regain control. He overruled another objection. He reminded the defense of the court's authority. But no one was reacting the way they had in the morning. The audience was no longer intimidated. They were watching. At 2:11, Bondi moved to admit an evidence packet marked Exhibit B. "Your Honor, this contains copies of 3 filings made to the clerk's office over the past 4 months, all related to concerns of judicial conduct. All disappeared from the court's digital record." Chen paused. "That's not possible," he said. "It's been verified by the Department of Justice," Bondi replied. "As of this morning, they are aware of the deletions." Silence settled over the room again. The DOJ observer was no longer in her seat. She was standing now, conferring with 2 men who had entered during the last recess. They wore dark suits and earpieces. Bondi continued as if reading a weather report. Additionally, we are entering financial records, communications, and testimony which indicate a pattern of behavior that may warrant further review by federal authorities. Chen's voice rose. Ms. Bondi, this is a court of law, not a stage for political theatrics. You're dangerously close to contempt. Pam Bondi did not flinch. Understood, Your Honor, she said. But as an officer of this court, I am required to report any evidence that suggests the appearance of impropriety or actual misconduct by a member of the judiciary. Chen looked across the courtroom. The faces looking back at him were no longer respectful. They were calculating. Bondi remained standing. She did not raise her hand. She did not make accusations. She simply opened the next folder. This contains bank records and meeting logs between Your Honor and the CEO of Gulfram Industries, a party with direct financial interest in the outcome of this case. Chen did not speak. And this, she continued, is a request for recusal filed under Title 28, Section 455 of the United States Code. A single sound broke the silence, the bailiff's shoe shifting on the floor. What began as a routine morning had become something else entirely, and Judge Edward Chen was no longer the one in control. The gallery was silent. The air in Courtroom 4B had shifted so completely that even seasoned attorneys whispered with caution. For the first time that day, Judge Chen was not speaking. Pam Bondi remained standing. In front of her, the court clerk distributed sealed copies of the financial records, the emails, and the motion for judicial recusal. Her co-counsel stood ready, but said nothing. The team was unified in stillness. The DOJ agents had moved closer. Without disrupting the proceedings, their presence now framed the room. They weren't watching the attorneys. They were watching the bench. Judge Chen cleared his throat, the first sound he'd made in almost 2 minutes. This court, he said, will take a brief recess. But before the bailiff could respond, a new voice rang out from the back. Your Honor, said a woman in a charcoal gray suit, walking forward with authority. My name is Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez. I represent the Department of Justice Public Integrity Section. I have been authorized to inform this court that a federal investigation is now formally underway. A single document was handed to the clerk. The courtroom reporter continued typing, her fingers moving steadily without pause. Vasquez continued, her voice level and unhurried. The department has reviewed the evidence presented by counsel for the defense. Based on that material and independent corroboration by federal agents, Judge Edward Chen is being placed under emergency review for judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and violations of the RICO Act. The judge's gavel sat untouched. His hands remained on the bench, but they were no longer steady. Pam Bondi did not smile. She did not speak. She simply sat down, her role in this moment complete. As murmurs broke out in the gallery, the bailiff turned toward the bench but didn't move. Instead, he looked to the DOJ agents. One of them stepped forward. Judge Chen, he said, please step down. The courtroom held its breath. The judge didn't argue. Slowly, he stood, adjusting his robe as if still trying to maintain the ceremony of his position. But the power had left the room. All that remained was the weight of what had been revealed. A marshal approached with handcuffs. Chen's eyes met Bondi's as they closed around his wrists. His mouth opened slightly, as if to say something. But there was nothing left to say. He was escorted past the prosecution table, past the reporters, past the jury box where heads turned in stunned silence. As he neared the back of the courtroom, Deputy Director Vasquez stepped aside. The department will conduct a full review of all cases presided over by Judge Chen within the past 5 years, she announced. Any convictions affected by these proceedings will be re-examined. In the gallery, some reporters were already typing headlines. Others simply watched. Vasquez turned to the jury. You are hereby released from duty. Thank you for your service. The jurors stood slowly. Some looked toward Bondi. One elderly woman gave her a small nod, eyes unreadable but full of weight. When the courtroom cleared, Pam Bondi remained seated for several minutes. Her team said nothing. No celebration. No congratulations. Only quiet. The kind of quiet that follows long effort and longer restraint. Outside, the courthouse steps had become a media arena. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Bondi did not rush to the podium. She exited through a side door, unhurried, escorted only by her co-counsel and a federal agent. Across the street, a billboard advertising a corporate law firm flickered with a slogan, integrity, power, results. Pam Bondi didn't look up. She stepped into the waiting car, her file still in hand. And as the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, she finally closed the folder that had started it all. The system had tried to silence her, but it had been her silence, measured, methodical, and unshaken, that had brought the system to its knees.